I went back to Fort Meade, Maryland after my leave. I tried flying on military planes, and that only got me to Spokane. So I finally just got on the train and went on back. We went up into Canada. I guess we wanted to get around Chicago or something, whatever, and wound up at Fort Meade. Fort Meade was named after some mediocre Union general in the Civil War. Just in case you're not up on these things, there are camps and there are forts. A fort is a permanent installation. A camp is temporarily and is abandoned when its usefulness is done. Like I was trained at Camp Roberts, but went to Fort Sill, of course, which was a permanent thing. The last weekend, before we were to go, we were there just a few days. Buddy and I went to New York, got insulted by a couple of girls. They called us paddle feet, so we got bad and went back to Fort Meade. They let us know enough in advance that we were leaving, which allowed me time to go somewhere, I forget where it was, and send a telegram to Kay, letting her know that something was up, or I forget what I said. But anyway, I told her I loved her and be getting back to her, words to that effect. So we got on a passenger train at Fort Meade, and we wound up at about 1 o'clock in the morning on the dock in New York. They were loading the Queen Elizabeth. They had been loading that now for 3 days. So when we went on at 1 o'clock, we were one of the last to get on the boat. So we were real lucky because they load a troop ship. The first in is the last off. So when we got to our destination, we were the first to get off. Some of those guys had been on there for 3 days because the ship holds about 16,000 troops, and that's as long as it takes to load it. Card games and gambling of all kinds went on. Well, be cards and craps. But we got to the dock about 1 o'clock, and we unloaded and went directly on the ship. And about 6 o'clock, they untied the boat and we took off. I was still excited and couldn't sleep, so I was out on deck and watched the Statue of Liberty as it went by. This means I'm on the port side promenade deck observation lounge. I was also lucky by not having to be on the boat because I didn't have to eat the food they were eating. They fed us 2 times a day on the way over. Orange marmalade at breakfast with toast, I think, and maybe powdered eggs. And actually for years after the war, I couldn't stand the orange marmalade. On board, there wasn't much to do. Of course, the enlisted men, every open space on the deck seemed to have some card game or crap game going on. I never did. Yeah, I don't know I don't think I even tried it, but I never did get an urging to gamble, even after I got out of the Army, and we would go through Las Vegas or Reno, maybe $50, but we learned to gamble. Never learned to gamble. But the officers, they had the Red Cross girls and USO, wax, and those girls, so they were entertained. They were on the deck above the one I was on. My bunk was on the promenade deck observation lounge. If you've ever been on a passenger ship, the observation lounge would be a spacious part of the boat up front, where with windows looking out over the where you're going, and the promenade deck is where you can walk around the ship away from the riffraff. So that's where my compartment was. When you went in from the companionway into the observation lounge, my bunk was immediately inside, maybe a couple stacks away from the entrance. There was an aisleway between two rows of bunks, I think stacked four high. My son Tom, who was in the Marine, said that on his ship, which was an LST, that there were five high. So I don't know. Don't remember on mine for sure. And which was very close to the promenade or the aisle or the companionway next to it. So it was easy to get out and look at the ocean as it went by. And that is the reason why we were last on, because it was all filled up inside. I don't know where my duffel bag was. I can't remember where we put it, because all I can remember is two rows of bunks, four high. I think it's four high. They put out a little newspaper on the boat, and I kept it for years and years afterwards. I think I even copied it all, but I can't find that copy. I can only find one part of it, so I'll show it to you. The voyage took us 6 days. The normal would be 3, but we went very far south to avoid the submarines. There are only 2 harbors in England that can accommodate Queen Elizabeth, which are Southampton, which is still just across the channel from the French coast, and Glasgow. But in Glasgow, although they could get it inside the harbor, they couldn't dock it. They had to unload it by barge and lighter. Shortly after we anchored, we were loaded onto a barge or lighter and taken to the shore, marched, and got on the train right away. While there, they had the Red Cross girls giving us free coffee. One of the girls who was giving us free coffee was running to give it to some guy and hanging out the window, and she stumbled and fell and spilled that big bucket of coffee, which we all felt real bad for her because she was trying so hard. But when they got the train loaded up, they pulled the blinds, and the next thing we know, we're in that was at night. We went that night, and the next day we found ourselves in Southampton. We'd gone through London, or I suppose wherever. We didn't even see it. We had to wait for many years after Kay and me to go to London to see it. We then loaded onto a Polish boat, kind of a dirty thing, but we sailed. We went across the channel and to Le Havre. When we marched through town, going out to the Rebel depots, which were named after cigarettes, like Camel, Lucky Strike, so on, we passed by these buildings with women looking at us. Some guys would throw up candy and cigarettes to them, and it was strange. We couldn't figure out why, but they wasn't smiling or greeting us, which was strange. After all, we're the Americans. We're knight in shining armor. We're here to rescue from the evil Germans. But we didn't know at that time that our Air Force, just about 4 months before, had bombed Le Havre and killed 5,000 people in Le Havre. That was the last big raid before we got there, but in the years prior to that, many had been killed. So it is no wonder that they were not interested in greeting us and smiling to meet us. In the documentary, The World at War, put out in about 1950 or so for TV, the British were getting heavy losses at the start of the war when they tried to bomb Germany during the daylight. And their research showed that only 3 bombs out of 100 got within 5 miles of the target. So they were getting such losses that they decided they might as well go to night bombing. They had a hard time finding the target, and besides that, I guess that as long as you weren't going to be within 5 miles of the target anyways, so you could hit a whole city. So they... Harris, chief of Bomber Command, said that they would destroy the people's will to fight by destroying their cities. It was only until the American Air Force, 8th Air Force, came to Britain that the Americans tried daylight bombing. Even the Americans suffered terrible losses in daylight raids. The fortress B-17 wasn't that formidable against fighters until they were able to put into production the long-range fighter to protect them to the target. There would be times when hundreds of men would be lost and the planes shot down. In one raid in Schweinfurt, they lost 60 airplanes. So they were ready to quit if they hadn't got those long-range fighters. That's the reason they went to 25 missions, because they figured if you're going to be dead by the time you'd done 25 missions. You at least had a chance to live through the war. So, but anyway, after a day or two, we came back, marched back to the railroad yards, got on the train, but for latrines, there was, not on the train, of course, you had to get off the train, and they had a fence between the train and the town, so you go on the other side of the fence, and you were visible from the town, but you're hidden from the troop train, so that was strange. They didn't care what the French saw, I guess. Anyway, we headed into France, and on the way, of course, they just stopped along the way for rest stops. And that was the most miserable ride I ever had. You could not lie down. You had to sit up or walk the halls. To try that for a couple days. That's very uncomfortable. We were better off up in Belgium when we were on those boxcars. We were in the French passenger cars with in compartments, seating 6, I think, 3 across from each other. Somewhere in France, before we got to Belgium, we had stopped in some railroad yard somewhere. Going in the opposite direction was a train load of German prisoners. They were packed in open coal cars, so tight that if one fell over or died, they could not fall down. And we got some of them who could speak German had the opportunity to talk to them at least a little bit. But unfortunately, we didn't find out how long they'd been standing and anything else about them.